Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone." "You must be kidding," muttered Ethan, checking his watch for the fourth time in less than 2 minutes. It was his first experience using Uber, and to his impatience, the driver was already late. His BMW had broken down that morning, and with no other option, he had to use the app. That's when a silver Honda, just like the one on the app, stopped at the light right next to him. He didn't think twice. He opened the door, tossed his briefcase in the back seat, and got in like a general heading to battle. "Go. Just go," he ordered without even looking at the driver's face. "What?" said a woman's voice, a little husky and completely shocked. "Come on, lady. Just drive," he replied, typing on his phone. The driver's eyes widened. Her face went pale, and in pure panic, she slammed on the gas. "Oh my God, I want to live," she screamed, gripping the wheel with both hands as if she were fleeing for her life. Ethan dropped his phone. Hey, why are you screaming like that?" "Because you're robbing me, you lunatic," she cried, glancing at him through the mirror. "I just stopped at the light." "Help! Oh God!" "I'm what?" he shouted, now panicking too. "I'm not robbing you. Aren't you my Uber?" "Uber? I work in an office." "Then why did you stop in front of the coffee shop like a rideshare car?" "Because there was a red light." "Oh, for heaven's sake." She pulled the car over to the shoulder with a jolt that almost made Ethan choke on his own shout. They stared at each other in silence for 3 seconds. The engine was still roaring. Embarrassment filled the air. "All right," he finally said with a sigh. "That was confusing." "Confusing? You barged into my car, told me to just go, and almost gave me a heart attack. I nearly called the police." Ethan scratched the back of his neck, trying to stay composed. The truth was, now that the adrenaline was fading, he realized just how funny the whole thing was. "Okay, it was a mistake." He smiled. "A misunderstanding." "All right, a misunderstanding that could have ended in a lawsuit. And believe me, I know how these things work. I work in a law office." He froze. "Really? Really? You're lucky I don't carry a weapon." Ethan laughed. "You know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I was running late, saw the car, thought it was my Uber, and jumped in without thinking. It was an impulse." He paused. "But since you work at an office and seem to be heading downtown, would you mind giving me a ride?" At this point, the Uber has probably canceled anyway. Sophie huffed, still upset, but there was something in his expression, or maybe in the absurdity of the situation, that made her give in. "Fine, but only because you look like a lost fool." "I may be lost, but I'm not a fool. I'm Ethan." He extended his hand. "I'm Sophie. And let's be clear. If you try anything suspicious, I'll crash this car into a pole. I've already been traumatized enough for today." During the ride, they teased each other. Sophie explained she was late because her sister had turned off her alarm. Ethan mentioned he hated public transportation. She called it rich people drama. He called her lightning driver. They laughed. They complained about traffic, and for a brief moment, they forgot the madness that had started their morning. When they reached the tall, mirrored building of Carter and Lee Law, Ethan pointed, "Here it is. The firm where I work." "Really?" Sophie stopped the car smoothly. "I work here too." His eyes widened. "You've got to be kidding." "No, I'm Victor's assistant. He works on the 8th floor. I'm a partner." "And I've never seen you there." "Well, I've never seen a lawyer jump into random cars in the middle of the street either. And yet, here we are." Ethan looked at her for a moment, intrigued. "Sophie, thank you for the ride and for the near-death experience. It was unforgettable." She laughed. "Thank me by buying me a coffee sometime, but next time you better get into the right car." He got out, and as he climbed the steps to the entrance, he couldn't resist looking back. Sophie was still in the car, laughing to herself. He smiled. Definitely unforgettable. Ethan spent the entire morning trying to focus on the contracts on his desk, but his mind kept drifting back to that brown-haired woman who had almost scared him to death and to laughter just a few hours earlier. Every time he thought about her terrified face yelling, "I want to live," he let out a quiet chuckle that made his secretary, Linda, raise a concerned eyebrow. "Mr. Brooks?" Linda appeared at the door for the 3rd time. "Are you all right? Do you need anything?" "I'm great, Linda. Better than ever, actually." She looked at him as if he had completely lost his mind and walked away, shaking her head. Ethan didn't care. He was far too curious to know more about Sophie, Victor's assistant, who drove like she was in a police chase and had the sharpest tongue he'd come across in years. When lunchtime came, Ethan decided to take a walk through the hallways before heading out. Pure coincidence, of course. It had absolutely nothing to do with the chance of running into Sophie again. Absolutely nothing. Walking down the 8th floor, also a coincidence since Victor worked there, Ethan heard a familiar laugh echoing down the hall. He slowed his pace and saw Sophie at the center of a small group of employees, gesturing animatedly as she told a story. So I said to the client, "Sir, you want to sue your neighbor because her cat pooped in your yard? Fine, but just know you'll be known as the cat poop lawsuit guy for the next 5 years." Sophie mimicked a deep, pompous voice. He gave up right then. The group burst out laughing. Ethan hid behind a column, watching in fascination. Sophie was naturally funny, spontaneous, and held everyone's attention without even trying. Nothing about her was forced or calculated. The complete opposite of the people he usually spent time with, who measured every word as if they were in a business meeting. "Sophie, you're terrible," laughed Clara from accounting. "Poor Mum, poor nothing." Sophie rolled her eyes. "You didn't see the size of the fence he wanted to build just because of a cat. Looked like he was preparing for an alien invasion." Ethan couldn't help it, and let out a loud laugh. Everyone turned to look at him. Sophie's eyes widened when she saw him. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, crossing her arms with a mischievous smile. "The man who breaks into other people's cars." "Hey, that was a misunderstanding," Ethan said as he walked closer, trying to seem casual. "And from what I've heard, you've got way more embarrassing stories than I do. My stories don't involve accidental kidnapping. Technically, you kidnapped me. I just got in the car." The group watched their back and forth like it was a tennis match. Clara whispered something to the colleague beside her, who covered her mouth to keep from laughing out loud. "Oh, sure." Sophie pretended to be offended. "It's my fault for driving my own car. It's your fault for speeding like you were in Formula 1. I sped up because I thought you were a criminal, a very well-dressed criminal. At least," Sophie gave him a once-over, eyeing his perfectly tailored suit, well-dressed, maybe, but still suspicious. The group laughed again, and Ethan felt a strange satisfaction at managing to get that smile out of her. Sophie had a unique way of teasing, direct but not cruel, smart but not arrogant, and she definitely didn't treat him with the usual reverence he got from other employees at the firm. "All right, I'm going to lunch," Sophie announced, grabbing her purse before another lost lawyer decides to kidnap me. She walked past Ethan, giving him a playful nudge on the arm. "Try not to get into the wrong car again, okay?" And she headed down the hall, leaving Ethan standing there with a goofy smile on his face. What he didn't notice was Victor watching the whole scene from the other end of the corridor, leaning against his office doorframe. He had caught every glance, every laugh, every second of that exchange, and he didn't like what he saw, especially the spark in Ethan's eyes when he looked at Sophie. Victor knew that look. He had seen it before in meetings whenever Ethan set his sights on an important case or a promotion he wanted. It was the look of someone who had found his next goal. And that was a problem, because Victor had feelings for Sophie, feelings he never had the courage to express, but that grew quietly each day they worked together. With every laugh of hers, every moment she showed her sharp intelligence and contagious good humor. "Mr. Victor," Sophie appeared next to him, coming back from the elevator. "I forgot my wallet. Are you all right? You look worried." "I'm fine, Sophie." He forced a smile. "Just thinking about the afternoon cases." "Oh, the construction company lawsuit. I sorted all the documents you asked for. They're on your desk, organized by date. Perfect as always." Sophie smiled and stepped into the office to grab her wallet. "Sophie," he said, moving closer, "when you get back from lunch, can we review the Piton Associates contracts? Something urgent came up." "Of course, Mr. and Victor," she answered right away. "Anything you need." When Sophie walked out of the room with Victor by her side, Ethan was standing in the hallway talking with another lawyer. "Good lunch, Sophie," Ethan said with a smile that never reached his eyes. He nodded. "Ethan," Victor replied in the same tone. Sophie looked from one to the other, feeling a strange tension in the air, but not quite able to tell what it was. "Well, I'll be going then. See you later." She stepped away, leaving the two men staring at each other. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "Victor, I hope there's no problem with me talking to Sophie." "Problem?" Victor adjusted his glasses. "Why would there be a problem with you talking to my assistant?" The emphasis on the word "my" was subtle, but Ethan caught it right away. "No particular reason. I just wanted to be sure we're all professional here. We've always been, Ethan. Always." The two parted, each heading in a different direction down the hallway, but both knew something had shifted that morning. Ethan kept coming up with excuses to pass by the 8th floor for the rest of the week. He needed to check some files in the legal department. He wanted to speak with the research staff. He had forgotten to sign some documents. Sophie, for her part, started to notice the pattern, and as much as she tried to deny it, she found it amusing how Ethan tried to look casual when it was obvious he was going out of his way to bump into her. "You again around here?" she asked on Thursday when she saw him checking some files very close to her desk. "I have the right to walk around my own firm, don't I?" "You do, but usually partners don't need to walk around the same hallway 5 times a day." Ethan pretended to be offended. 5 times? It was at most 3. It was 7. "I counted." He laughed, defeated. "Fine. You caught me." "Ethan Brooks." Sophie stood up and crossed her arms. "You're arrogant, inconvenient, and clearly have nothing better to do." Ethan waited for the but. There was always a but when someone started a sentence like that. "But," she continued, and he smiled. "You're also funny, and I've kind of gotten used to your mysterious appearances." "Kind of gotten used to me?" "Don't let it go to your head." From then on, the teasing between them became part of the routine. Ethan would show up with some flimsy excuse to be on the 8th floor. Sophie answered with sharp remarks about his dedication to work. He called her kamikaze driver. She called him lost partner. And Victor watched it all, feeling the knot in his stomach tighten with every shared laugh, every lingering glance, every moment he noticed Ethan managing to make Sophie smile in a way he never had. The atmosphere on the 8th floor was definitely heating up, and everyone knew something was about to happen. The following Monday, Ethan decided he had wasted enough time with excuses. It was time for a more direct approach. After all, he was Ethan Brooks. When he wanted something, he got it. And what he wanted now was Sophie working for him. At least, that's what he told himself. He found Sophie in the break room making a coffee that smelled far too good to be the kind the firm provided. "Good morning, Sophie. Special coffee today?" "Good morning, Ethan," she answered without looking at him, stirring in sugar a little harder than necessary. "Yes. I brought it from home. The coffee here tastes awful." "Interesting. Have you always been this detail-oriented?" Sophie finally looked at him, suspicious. Ethan Brooks making small talk about coffee in the break room. "That's new. What do you want?" He laughed. He had to admit he liked how direct she was. "I want to make you an offer. If it's for more driving lessons, the answer is no." "Better than that." Ethan stepped closer, taking on his most professional stance. "I want you to come work with me as my personal assistant." Sophie almost dropped her cup. "What?" "You heard me. Personal assistant. Double your current salary, better benefits, access to more important cases. A real career." Sophie stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to figure out whether he was serious or if this was some kind of elaborate joke. "Ethan, did you hit your head when you got out of my car?" "I'm serious, Sophie. Double the salary. Triple it. And it would still be no." Ethan blinked, surprised. "Triple? Not everyone gets an offer like that, and not everyone turns it down. But I am." "Why?" "It's an incredible opportunity. Because I'm loyal to Victor. He gave me a chance when no one else would. He taught me everything I know about corporate law. He treated me with respect from day one. I can treat you with respect too, Ethan." Sophie zegt, "You're offering me money to abandon my boss. That's not respect. That's just fancy bribery." "It's not bribery. It's business. Maybe for you, for me, it's about character." Ethan felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Admiration, frustration, maybe both. "Sophie, you're passing up a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm passing up the chance to become the kind of person who betrays someone who trusts her, just for money. And you know what? I'm glad to miss out on that." That was when Victor appeared in the doorway of the break room. From the look on his face, it was obvious he had overheard at least part of the conversation. "Ethan." Victor's voice was controlled, but there was a coldness Sophie had never heard before. "May I have a word with you?" Sophie looked from one to the other, feeling the tension in the air. "I'll go back to my desk," she murmured, grabbing her coffee and leaving quickly. The two men were left alone in the break room. Victor closed the door. Stealing employees now? Victor adjusted his glasses, a habit Sophie knew as a sign of nervousness. "Stealing is a strong word, Victor. I'd say I'm offering opportunities." "Opportunities," Victor repeated with a smile that never reached his eyes. "How considerate of you to think about Sophie's professional development. She's talented. She deserves more than just organizing your files." "My files?" Victor's voice rose. "Ethan, Sophie is not just organizing files. She drafts contracts, does complex legal research, meets with clients, She's learning more with me in a year than she would in 5 years as your personal assistant. Being a partner's personal assistant is a very respected position. A personal assistant who fetches coffee and schedules meetings. Please, Ethan. We both know what you're doing. Ethan straightened, sensing the challenge in Victor's voice. And what exactly am I doing? Trying to impress a woman with your money and your position? The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Victor, you're getting involved in matters that are none of your business. Sophie has worked for me for 2 years. Her matters are my matters for now. What do you mean, for now? Ethan smiled, but it was a cold smile. I just said, things can change. People change their minds, especially when they realize they're limiting their own possibilities. Victor took a step forward. Ethan, I'll say this only once. Leave Sophie alone. Or what? Or you'll find out that not everyone in this firm is impressed by your last name and your bank account. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Victor, you're forgetting who you're talking to. I'm talking to someone who is trying to use power and money to get what he wants. And that, Ethan, doesn't impress me one bit. Good to know. Because I'm not trying to impress you. They stared at each other for a few more seconds. Victor was the first to move, opening the break room door. This conversation is over. Yes, Ethan agreed. Adjusting his tie. It's over. But both knew the conversation was only just beginning. In the days that followed, the tension in the office became tangible. Employees noticed that Victor and Ethan, who used to keep a cordial professional relationship, now barely greeted each other in the hallways. Ethan kept showing up on the 8th floor. But now his visits had a less subtle purpose. He praised Sophie's work out loud, mentioned interesting cases coming up in his department, and always found a way to make it clear his offer was still on the table. Sophie, he said on a Wednesday, walking by her desk, that report on corporate mergers you did last week was excellent, very insightful. Thank you. She replied without looking up from the documents. You have a natural talent for strategic analysis. It's rare to find someone with your business intuition. Sophie finally looked at him. Ethan, you're doing this on purpose. Doing what? Being, I don't know, complimentary. You were never like this before. Maybe I was just slow to realize how good you are at what you do. Or maybe you're trying to convince me to accept your offer by using a different strategy. Ethan smiled. You know me well. I know enough to know you don't give up easily. That's an admirable quality in a lawyer. It can be admirable. Sophie leaned back in her chair. But it can also be annoying. Annoying how? Like when you keep pushing for an answer that's already been given. Victor, who was leaving his office, had witnessed the whole exchange. He walked over to Sophie's desk with a serious expression. Sophie, I need you to review the Anderson Inc. contracts. There are some clauses that need to be rewritten. Of course, Mr. Victor, she answered immediately. I'll do it now. Ethan watched the exchange, noticing how Sophie immediately gave Victor her full attention, how she treated him with a genuine respect that went beyond professional hierarchy, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Well, Ethan clapped his hand softly. I'll let you two get back to work. Sophie, if you change your mind about my offer, I won't. She cut him off, though not rudely. You never know. Ethan winked and walked away. Victor waited until Ethan was out of sight before speaking. Sophie, I hope you know you don't have to be polite to him if you don't want to. I know Mr. Sakin date of call. Victor, but being rude won't fix anything. And honestly, I think he'll get bored soon and move on to something else. Victor seriously doubted that. He had known Ethan for years, and he knew that once Ethan set a goal, he wouldn't stop until he got it. The problem was Victor no longer knew if Ethan's goal was to win Sophie over as an employee or as something more, and that uncertainty was starting to cost him sleep. As the week went by, other employees began commenting on the Cold War between the two lawyers. Clara from accounting bet with her colleague in HR that something would explode by Friday. Linda, Ethan's secretary, mentioned to the receptionist that she had never seen her boss so focused on one project. And Sophie tried to keep things normal, but she was beginning to realize she had become the center of a dispute she hadn't asked for and didn't know how to handle. What she didn't know was that Ethan had already decided on his next strategy, and Victor was preparing his defense. The war of kindness began Tuesday morning. Sophie arrived at her desk and found a gourmet coffee from the most expensive cafe on the block, still steaming, with a little note. For the best legal assistant in Manhattan, Ebb. She looked around for Ethan, but he was somewhere pretending he had nothing to do with it. Fancy, Clara murmured as she passed by her desk. Someone's trying to impress you. 15 minutes later, Victor showed up with a box of donuts from Sophie's favorite bakery, the small, cozy one 2 blocks from the office. "Thought you might want something sweet to go with the coffee," he said, placing the box on her desk with a smile that was trying to look casual. Sophie looked at the expensive coffee, then at the homemade-style donuts, and finally at Victor. "Mr. Victor, you didn't have to." "Of course I did. You work hard and deserve to be spoiled once in a while." Ethan, who just happened to be walking by at that exact moment, stopped and watched the scene. His eyes narrowed as he saw Sophie smiling at Victor while choosing a donut. On Wednesday, it was the printer's turn. Sophie was struggling with the stubborn machine that refused to print an important contract when Ethan appeared out of nowhere, like some kind of tech superhero. "Printer problems?" he asked, already rolling up his sleeves as if he were about to perform surgery. "It's making this weird noise and won't print anything," Sophie explained, frustrated. Ethan pressed a few buttons, opened and closed a few trays, and miraculously the printer came back to life. "There you go," he said with a victorious smile. "It just needed a man's touch." "Wow, thank you. How did you know what to do?" "I have my hidden talents." What Sophie didn't know was that Ethan had broken the printer on purpose the night before, staying late at the office to program a small error into the system that only he would know how to fix. Victor, watching from his office doorway, frowned. On Thursday, when Sophie mentioned she needed to make several copies for a meeting, Victor showed up with a technician who just happened to be around to do preventive maintenance on all the printers on the floor. "What an amazing coincidence," Ethan said sarcastically to Linda. Victor brought in a technician the very day Sophie needed the printer. "Do you think he did it on purpose?" Linda asked, intrigued. "Linda, in this office, nothing is a coincidence." By Friday, the competition had escalated to an entirely new level. Ethan started by praising Sophie's report during a department-wide meeting, calling out her brilliant analysis and fresh perspective for everyone in the legal team to hear. Victor hit back by inviting Sophie to join a meeting with important clients, introducing her as my most talented and insightful assistant. Sophie suddenly found herself being passed back and forth, like a trophy, praised, consulted, and included in discussions that normally weren't part of her responsibilities. "This is getting ridiculous," she murmured to Clara over lunch. "They're acting like 2 peacocks in mating season. You're complaining about getting all that attention?" Clara laughed. "Half the women in this office would kill to be in your place." "It's not real attention, Clara. It's strategy. They're using me as part of a game I don't fully understand." "Oh, Sophie, you do understand. You just don't want to admit it." Sophie sicht. Clara was right. She knew exactly what was happening. And as much as she tried to pretend it was only about work, there was more to it. The way Ethan looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the way Victor lit up whenever she laughed at one of his jokes. The situation came to a head the following Monday, when a relatively simple real estate case turned into a legal headache. The client, Mr. 4. Peterson, had bought a commercial building and later discovered there was an unrecorded easement allowing the neighbor to use part of the parking lot. The seller had forgotten to mention that little detail. Victor was in the conference room, surrounded by stacks of documents, clearly frustrated. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, taking off his glasses to rub his eyes. "The paperwork is all over the place. I can't find the legal basis to challenge the easement." Sophie, who was organizing the files, paused and watched Victor for a moment. Then she glanced at the documents scattered on the table. "Mr. Victor, may I take a look?" "Of course, Sophie. Maybe you'll see something I don't." Sophie stepped closer to the table and began examining the papers. After a few minutes of focused silence, her eyes lit up. "Mr. Victor, did you check the date of the original easement?" "Of course, it's here. 1987. "And when was the last land survey done?" Victor searched through the documents. 1995. "Why? Because if we look at this 1995 map and compare it with the description of the 1987 easement, Sophie placed 2 documents side by side. The area described in the easement no longer exists. It was changed during the 1995 renovation." Victor looked at the documents, then at Sophie, then back at the documents. "Sophie, are you saying—" "I'm saying the easement refers to a space that was physically altered, making it technically invalid. Mr. Peterson can challenge it based on the physical impossibility of fulfilling the original terms." Victor was silent for a long moment, then began to smile. "Sophie, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Do you think it could work?" "Could it work? It'll solve the entire case." Victor stood up and, on impulse, hugged Sophie. It was quick, professional. But Sophie felt something different in it, an admiration that went beyond respect for her work. On the other side of the conference room glass, Ethan was watching the whole scene. He saw the moment of discovery, saw Victor hug Sophie, saw the genuine happiness in both their eyes, and he felt a stab of jealousy that surprised him with its intensity. It wasn't just professional jealousy, it was something more personal, more primal. Ethan realized with uncomfortable clarity that he didn't just want Sophie working for him, he wanted Sophie. Period. In the days that followed, Sophie's name began circulating through the halls with a new kind of respect. The assistant who saved the Peterson case, the young woman Victor always praises, the girl with an eye for detail. Sophie felt the change. People greeted her differently. Other lawyers stopped to ask her opinion on cases. She was no longer just Victor's assistant. She was becoming Sophie, the talented assistant, but with recognition also came greater pressure. Ethan stepped up his attempts to impress her, showing up with invitations to major legal events and mentioning unique opportunities coming up in his department. Victor, meanwhile, began including her in more decisions, asking for her opinion on strategies, and treating her more like a colleague than a subordinate. Sophie found herself at the center of a storm of attention that was both flattering and uncomfortable. She knew both men were interested in her, and it was no longer possible to pretend it was only about work. Ethan had dropped any pretense of subtlety. Victor was wrestling with feelings he had kept buried for years. And Sophie was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, she had a few feelings of her own to sort out. The battle of kindness had turned into something much more complicated, and everyone in the office knew something was about to explode. Ethan showed up at Sophie's desk on a Thursday at 11:45 with that expression she was already learning to recognize, determination disguised as casualness. "Sophie, how about having lunch together today?" he asked, leaning on her desk with a charming smile. "I want to talk about your career." Sophie looked at him over her reading glasses, suspicious. "My career is going just fine. Thank you. I know. That's exactly why I want to talk. There are some opportunities coming up that might interest you." "Ethan, we've already had this conversation. Not about working for me," he interrupted quickly. "About your future, your potential, things that go beyond this firm." Sophie hesitated. As much as she distrusted Ethan's intentions, she had to admit she was curious. "Fine," she sighed, "but I picked the place. Perfect. Anywhere you want. Giovanni's. That little Italian place on 47th Street. Ethan blinked, surprised. He had expected her to pick the usual food truck. "Giovanni's is a lot more sophisticated than I imagined. Just because I eat at food trucks doesn't mean I don't have good taste. Ethan, it means I'm on a budget." 30 minutes later, they were sitting at a cozy table at Giovanni's, a small and welcoming Italian restaurant. Ethan had never noticed it, even though he passed by every day. "So," Sophie placed her napkin on her lap. "What's this mysterious talk about my career?" Ethan took a sip of wine and straightened. "Sophie, you have real talent. The Peterson case proved that, but I get the feeling you're underestimating yourself." "What do you mean?" "You're fine with staying in the position of assistant when you're clearly capable of much more. I'm not talking about coming to work for me." He raised his hand before she could protest. "I'm talking about you recognizing your own value." Sophie studied him carefully. "And what exactly do you think I should do?" "For starters, stop settling for crumbs. You deserve a seat at the table, not to be serving coffee to the people sitting there." Sophie was about to answer when a familiar voice sounded behind her. "Sophie, what an incredible coincidence." She turned and saw Victor approaching with a smile that didn't quite hide the unpleasant surprise of finding them there. "Mr. Victor, what are you doing here?" "Last-minute meeting with a client. It ended earlier than expected." Victor looked at Ethan with icy courtesy. "Ethan, good to see you here." "Victor." Ethan returned the greeting in the same tone. "Join us. We were having a very interesting conversation about professional development." Victor didn't wait for a second invitation. He pulled up a chair and sat down, creating a triangle of tension. Sophie could almost touch professional development. Victor smiled at Sophie. "What a fascinating topic. Sophie has so much potential, doesn't she, Ethan?" "Exactly what I was saying," Ethan replied, cutting into his pasta with more force than necessary. "Sophie deserves recognition for her exceptional talent. I couldn't agree more. That's why I'm considering recommending her for a promotion." Ethan stopped chewing. "Promotion?" "To senior legal assistant with a substantial raise and more responsibilities." Sophie looked from one to the other, realizing she had become the prize in a competition happening right in front of her. "Guys," she interrupted, "you do know I'm sitting right here, don't you?" You can stop talking about me like I'm some kind of project. You're right. Ethan smiled, though his eyes stayed on Victor. Sorry, Sophie. I just get excited when I see talent being wasted. Wasted? Victor adjusted his glasses dangerously. Sophie is learning more with me in 2 years than she would in 5 years in the corporate department. Interesting perspective, Ethan countered. Although I'd say diverse experience is always better for professional development. Diverse like fetching coffee and scheduling meetings. Diverse like participating in multi-million-dollar negotiations and international mergers. Sophie watched the exchange like it was a verbal tennis match. She decided to step in before one of them ended up with a fork in the eye. Since you're both so interested in my professional development, she said calmly, cutting into her own plate, maybe you should know that I'll be graduating from law school in just 2 months. Total silence. Ethan dropped his fork. Victor nearly choked on his wine. What? Ethan was the first to recover. Law evening program, NYU. I graduate in 2 months. Sophie kept eating as if she had just commented on the weather. I thought you both knew. Sophie. Victor leaned forward. You never mentioned? You never asked? You all just assumed I was only an assistant with no ambitions of my own. Ethan looked at her with a mix of admiration and something else. Sophie couldn't quite identify. You're going to be a lawyer. I'm going to try. I still need to pass the bar exam, but yes, that's the plan. Sophie. Victor cleared his throat, suddenly looking nervous. This changes everything. I always knew you were special, but now he stopped, glanced at Ethan, then back at Sophie. Sophie, I need to tell you something. His phone rang. He looked at the screen, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Sorry, I need to take this. It's urgent. He stepped away from the table, speaking quietly into the phone. Ethan and Sophie were left alone, surrounded by the clatter of dishes and the hum of other diners' conversations. So, Ethan leaned back in his chair. A lawyer. That explains a lot. Explains what? Why you're not intimidated by me. Why you talk to me as an equal. Why you solved the Peterson case in the blink of an eye. Sophie smiled. I've always been like this, Ethan. The degree will just make it official. Sophie. Ethan leaned forward, and for the first time, she saw something completely genuine in his eyes. You're incredible. There was something in his voice that made Sophie stop eating. It wasn't the tone of a boss impressed with his employee. It was something more personal, more vulnerable. Ethan, no, let me finish. Since that day in the car, you've changed something in me. I can't really explain it. But Victor came back to the table, clearly frustrated. Sorry, I have to get back to the office. Emergency with the Peterson case. He paused beside Sophie's chair, hesitating. Sophie, can we talk later about what I was trying to say? Of course, Mr. Victor. Victor nodded, gave Ethan one last look that Sophie couldn't quite read, and left. Ethan and Sophie finished lunch in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When Ethan asked for the check, Sophie tried to split it, but he refused. My treat, he said. Besides, now I know that in 2 months, I'll be having lunch with a colleague, not just an assistant. Ethan, that doesn't change anything between us. I'll still be me. I know, he smiled, but there was something different in that smile. Something more serious, more determined. That's exactly why it changes everything. On the way back to the office, Sophie tried to process what had just happened. Ethan had started to say something personal before Victor returned. Victor had tried to confess something before the phone rang, and she no longer knew what to think about either of them. Back at the office, Sophie tried to settle into her normal routine, but she felt the stares. Ethan walked past her desk 3 times in an hour, always finding an excuse. Victor stayed in his office, clearly waiting for a chance to resume the conversation that had been cut short. I need an aspirin, Sophie murmured to Clara, who had been watching the whole drama unfold. Honey, what you need is therapy. 2 men are interested in you, and you're complaining. It's not that simple, Clara. Why not? One is rich, handsome, and powerful. The other is smart, kind, and has adored you for years. What's the problem? Sophie sicht. The problem is I don't know if I can see them as just colleagues anymore, and that complicates everything. Clara smiled. Oh, honey, finally, you admitted it. Admitted what? That you're interested too. Now, the question is, which one? Sophie glanced at Victor's office, then at the elevator where Ethan had just disappeared. Good question. A question she still didn't have an answer to. Monday started like any other until Charles King III, senior attorney and walking ego, managed to turn what should have been a simple preliminary hearing into the legal equivalent of the Titanic. The case, Nelson versus Cybertech was the firm's biggest that quarter, an intellectual property dispute involving $50 million. Charles, in his infinite wisdom, had decided to improvise during the hearing and ended up admitting inadvertently that his client had used proprietary code without authorization. In other words, he had practically handed the case to the opposing side on a silver platter with a golden bow. The main conference room was in a state of public disaster. 6 senior attorneys, including Ethan and Victor, were gathered in an atmosphere that felt more like a funeral than a strategy meeting. How does someone manage to mess things up this badly? Ethan rubbed his temples. It was just a preliminary hearing. Charles said he felt the moment. Victor adjusted his glasses with resignation. Apparently, the moment told him to confess. "We're bankrupt," groaned Margaret Nelson, the lawyer in charge of the intellectual property department, $50 million down the drain because Charles decided to be spontaneous. Sophie was in the corner of the room, quietly organizing the documents she had prepared for the meeting. Technically, she wasn't supposed to be there. Assistants didn't attend crisis meetings, but Victor had insisted she bring all the case files. There has to be something. Ethan was pounding the table in frustration. Some loophole. Some precedent. Ethan, there's nothing. Margaret cut in. Charles admitted to unauthorized use in a public hearing with reporters present. It's in the official record. What if we challenge the court's jurisdiction? Suggested Lucas. Another partner. Based on what? Victor sighed. The case falls squarely within jurisdiction. Procedural error? There was no procedural error. There was Charles being Charles. Sophie kept organizing the papers, but she was listening to every word. She knew that case better than anyone else in the room. She had spent weeks organizing every document, every precedent, every technical detail, and she had noticed something no one else seemed to have seen. Maybe, she murmured, more to herself than to the group. Sophie? Margaret looked at her. Did you say something? All eyes turned to her. Sophie felt her cheeks flush, but she took a deep breath. Well, maybe there's a way out. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Sophie stepped up to the table, spreading out some documents. Charles admitted to using the code, right? But did he specify which version of the code was used? Sophie, Margaret said, that doesn't matter. Code is code. Actually, Sophie went on, ignoring the interruption, it does matter because if we look here, she pointed to a document. Cybertech registered 3 different versions of that code. Version 1, 0 inches, 2019. 2, 0 inches, 2021. And 3, 0 inches, 2023. So, what? Lucas asked impatiently. Sophie grabbed another document. So, our client, Nelson Industries, developed a similar code, independently, in 2020. It's all documented here. She spread out a series of papers, development records, internal emails, programmer's notes. The room went silent. Ethan leaned forward. Go on. If Charles never specified which version of the code was used, and if Cybertech is assuming it was the most recent version, we can argue that our client only used elements they developed independently, which just happened to resemble Cybertech's version 1. Ling. Victor took off his glasses and looked at her with growing admiration. Sophie, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that technically there was no intellectual property violation because the elements in question were developed simultaneously by both parties. It's a case of parallel development, not theft. Margaret picked up the documents and started flipping through them quickly. My God, she murmured. The dates match. Everything is documented. But Charles admitted the use. Lucas began. Charles admitted to using Cybertech code. Sophie quoted from memory. He didn't specify it was stolen code. If we prove they were developed simultaneously, the use was coincidental, not intentional. Ethan was staring at Sophie as if she had just raised someone from the dead. This could work. It will work. Victor stood up, energized. Sophie, this is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. The door opened, and Eleanor Carter, the firm's managing director, walked in. At 60, Eleanor was a woman who commanded respect simply by entering a room perfectly styled silver hair, a tailored suit, and eyes that seemed to see straight through people. I hope someone has good news, she said, closing the door behind her, because the phone hasn't stopped ringing with clients worried about the Charles incident. Eleanor, Sophie just found us a way out, Victor announced. Proud, Eleanor looked at Sophie, who suddenly felt like an insect under a microscope. The assistant, the future attorney, Ethan corrected, and Sophie felt an unexpected wave of gratitude. Interesting. Eleanor moved closer to the table. Explain. Sophie took a deep breath and repeated her analysis, this time with more confidence. Eleanor listened in silence, occasionally picking up a document to examine more closely. When Sophie finished, Eleanor stayed quiet for a long moment. Margaret, do you think this has a chance? More than a chance, Margaret was clearly impressed. It's a solid strategy. Creative, but solid. Victor, you've trained your assistant well. Actually, Victor smiled. I think she's trained me. Eleanor looked at Sophie again. How old are you? 24, ma'am. Any prior legal experience? Only what I've learned here, ma'am. And law school? New. I graduate in 2 months. Eleanor nodded slowly. Sophie, you just saved a $50 million case. Congratulations. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Now, everyone out. I need to make some calls to put this strategy in place before it's too late. Sophie, you stay. Ethan and Victor exchanged worried looks, but had no choice except to leave. Sophie was alone with the most powerful woman in the firm. Sit down. Eleanor motioned to a chair. Sophie obeyed, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. Sophie, in 20 years of running this firm, I've rarely seen someone your age show that level of strategic analysis. Where did that idea come from? I read all the documents several times, organizing, filing, and I started noticing patterns, inconsistencies. It seemed obvious that something wasn't being considered. Obvious. Eleanor repeated with a half smile. For you, maybe. For 6 senior attorneys with decades of experience, apparently not. Sophie didn't know what to say. Sophie, do you have plans after graduation? Not yet, ma'am. I was thinking of trying some smaller firms. Building experience. How about building experience here? Sophie blinked. What do you mean? I mean, as a junior attorney working directly with me. The silence that followed was broken only by the muffled sound of phones ringing outside. Mrs. Carter. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, but don't take too long. Talent like yours doesn't come around every day. Eleanor stood up. Now go. I have to save this case using your brilliant idea. Sophie left the office slightly unsteady. In the hallway, she found Ethan and Victor waiting anxiously. Well? Victor asked immediately. What did she want? Ethan stepped closer. Sophie looked at the 2 men, still processing what had just happened. I think I just got a job offer. Ethan and Victor exchanged a look, both realizing at the same time that Sophie would no longer be just the assistant they were competing for. In 2 months, she would be an attorney. And now, apparently, she would be an attorney working directly with Eleanor Carter. The game had completely changed, and neither Ethan nor Victor knew what the rules were anymore. The next morning, Sophie was still processing the events of the previous day when Linda appeared at her desk with a solemn expression. Sophie, Mrs. Carter wants to see you in her office. Now, Eleanor's office was on the top floor, a place Sophie had visited only once in 2 years at the firm to deliver urgent documents. It was a sanctuary of efficiency and elegance, with a panoramic view of Manhattan and a desk that looked as though it had been carved from a single ancient tree. Eleanor stood behind the desk, speaking on the phone in a commanding tone. No, James, I don't accept excuses. The report should have been on my desk yesterday. She gestured for Sophie to sit. Fix this by the end of the day, or find another job. She hung up and turned to Sophie with a smile that managed to be both warm and intimidating. Sophie, thank you for coming. Coffee? No, thank you, Mrs. Carter. Eleanor. You can call me Eleanor. Sophie blinked, surprised. In the hierarchy of Carter and Lee, Eleanor was practically divine. People like Sophie didn't call her by her first name. Make yourself comfortable. Eleanor settled into the armchair across from Sophie, stepping away from the formality of the desk. I want to talk with you about yesterday. If I did something wrong, on the contrary. Eleanor interrupted with a genuine smile. You did everything right. More than right. In fact, you saved a case that was lost. And you did it with a precision and elegance that impressed even me. Sophie felt her cheeks warm. I just noticed some inconsistencies in the documents. Sophie, you just minimized a strategic analysis that 6 senior attorneys completely missed. That's not just noticing inconsistencies. That's genuine talent. Eleanor leaned back in the chair, studying Sophie carefully. Tell me about yourself, your story, your goals. What brought you here? Sophie hesitated for a moment, then began to speak. She told her about growing up in Queens, about working part-time during college, about choosing law because she wanted to make a difference in the world. Eleanor listened attentively, asking focused questions that showed she was genuinely interested. And why did you choose to stay here as an assistant for 2 years instead of looking for opportunities at other firms? Victor, Sophie answered without hesitation. He gave me a chance when no one else would. He taught me everything I know about corporate law. I owed him that. Eleanor nodded, clearly approving of the response. Loyalty is a rare quality these days. But Sophie, there comes a time when loyalty can become a limitation to your own growth. What do you mean? I mean, you have a talent that goes far beyond organizing files and scheduling meetings. Yesterday, you proved that you can think strategically, act under pressure, and come up with creative solutions to complex problems. Those are the qualities of a top lawyer, not of an assistant. Sophie felt her heart race. Miss Carter, Eleanor, what are you saying? I want you to work directly with me as my executive assistant, with responsibilities that go far beyond what you're doing now. You would sit in on strategic meetings, help shape firm policies, work on high-profile cases. It would be a natural transition for when you graduate and officially become an attorney. Sophie stayed quiet, trying to process the offer. This is unexpected. Sophie, I'll be direct with you. I've been watching your situation with Victor and Ethan these past weeks. Both are excellent men, but they're looking at you through different lenses. Victor sees the loyal assistant he wants to protect. Ethan sees the challenge he wants to win. I see the future lawyer who needs room to grow. Sophie straightened in her chair. And what exactly are you offering? I'm offering you the chance to be seen for what you really are, a talented professional with unlimited potential. Working with me, you'll gain exposure to the most strategic aspects of the firm, networking with major clients, and experience that will prepare you to become a partner one day. Partner? Sophie almost choked. Why not? If you keep showing the kind of insight you did yesterday, I see no reason you couldn't get there in a few years. Sophie looked out the window, seeing the city stretch endlessly before her. 2 weeks ago, her biggest concern was surviving the Cold War between Ethan and Victor. Now, the most powerful woman at the firm was offering her a future she had never dared to imagine. Eleanor, I accept. Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since Sophie had known her, she looked genuinely pleased. Excellent. You can start next Monday. I'll have someone prepare your new office. New office? You'll need your own space. And Sophie, congratulations. You've just taken the first step toward a brilliant career. The news spread through the firm like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone knew that Sophie Parker had been promoted to Eleanor Carter's executive assistant. Ethan heard it from Linda, who heard it from Eleanor's secretary, who had seen Sophie leaving her boss's office with a radiant smile. Victor found out when Sophie came into his office to talk. Mr. Victor, she knocked on the door, stepping in with a look that was both determined and apologetic. I need to speak with you. Victor looked at her and immediately knew something had changed. There was something different in Sophie's posture, a new confidence that hadn't been there yesterday. Of course, Sophie. Sit down. I'd rather stand. This is official. Victor felt his stomach tighten. Sophie, what happened? Eleanor offered me a position as her executive assistant. I accepted. Total silence. Victor took off his glasses and carefully cleaned them, a habit Sophie recognized as a sign that he was processing something difficult. I see, he finally said. And when does this start? Next Monday. That's very soon. Victor. Sophie stepped closer to his desk. I want you to know this decision has nothing to do with our partnership. You've been an incredible mentor to me. You taught me everything I know. But you need to think about yourself. Victor finished with a sad smile. Sophie, I understand. I really do. You're not angry? Angry? Victor gave a humorless laugh. Sophie, I'm proud. You're doing exactly what you should be doing. It's just that I'll miss you more than I should. Sophie felt a pain in her chest, but held firm. Victor, you'll always be special to me, but I have to do this. I need to think about my future. I know, he sighed. And you're right. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't take the news nearly as gracefully. She did what? He practically shouted at Linda, who had made the mistake of casually mentioning Sophie's promotion. Mr. Brooks, are you all right? Ethan ran a hand through his hair, messing it up for the first time since Linda had known him. Eleanor Carter. Of course, it would be Eleanor Carter. Sir? Nothing, Linda. You can go. Ethan was left alone in his office, staring out the window without really seeing anything. He had completely underestimated Sophie. He thought he could win her over with charm and financial offers. But she had chosen something he couldn't give: genuine professional respect and a real opportunity to grow, and that bothered him more than he cared to admit. In the days that followed, Sophie's transformation was visible to everyone. She walked through the halls with her head held high, greeted colleagues with a new confidence, and when Ethan or Victor tried to speak with her, she answered with professional courtesy, but without the familiarity she once had. "Sophie." Ethan intercepted her on Friday near the elevator. "Congratulations on the promotion." "Thank you, Ethan. Can I invite you for a coffee to celebrate?" Sophie looked at him calmly. "Ethan, I appreciate the invitation, but I think it's better if we keep our relationship strictly professional from now on. I have a meeting with Eleanor in 5 minutes. Excuse me." She stepped into the elevator, leaving Ethan standing there, realizing he had lost something he hadn't even known he wanted so badly. That night, Ethan stayed late at the office, thinking Sophie was no longer the assistant he could impress with power and money. She had become a respected professional with her own goals and her own path. If he wanted any chance with her, and he was beginning to realize he wanted it desperately, he would have to find an entirely different way to approach her. He would have to figure out who Ethan Brooks really was beyond the last name in the bank account. And for the first time in years, that scared him as much as it excited him. Within 2 weeks, Sophie Parker had become a force of nature inside Carter and Lee Law. Her new office on the 15th floor, small but with a view of Central Park, had turned into a destination for junior lawyers seeking advice, secretaries needing approvals, and clients who had heard of the brilliant young woman working with Eleanor. Sophie discovered she had a natural talent for navigating corporate politics. She managed to be firm without being rude, authoritative without being arrogant, and she kept her sense of humor, even when dealing with egos the size of skyscrapers. She told her friend over lunch, "Yesterday, I had to explain to a millionaire client why he can't sue the Atlantic Ocean for being too wet." "You're joking." "I'm not. He slipped on a private beach and wants to hold someone responsible. He suggested the ocean should come with a warning that water is wet." Clara laughed so hard she nearly choked on her sandwich. "And how did you handle it?" "I told him we'd look for precedents in cases against bodies of water. He got excited, thinking we were actually going to do it." "Sophie, you're terrible." "I'm strategic," Eleanor said. "Sometimes we have to give clients the illusion that their crazy ideas are being considered before guiding them towards something sensible." It was that kind of insight that was making Sophie shine in her new position. Eleanor had been absolutely right. Sophie wasn't just intelligent. She was politically and emotionally intelligent, a rare combination in the legal world. Ethan noticed the change immediately. Sophie no longer walked through the halls like an assistant, trying not to bother anyone. Now she moved with purpose, greeted people by name, and when someone tried to ignore her or treat her condescendingly, she had a subtle but effective way of reminding them who she represented. On Wednesday, Ethan saw her put a senior attorney from another department in his place. "Miss Parker," the man had said in a patronizing tone, "I'm sure Eleanor doesn't want to be bothered with minor details like travel budgets." Sophie replied with a sweet smile that never reached her eyes. "Eleanor specifically asked me to review all budgets over $1,000, and I see here that you're requesting a presidential suite for 5 nights in Las Vegas for a 1-day legal conference. I'm sure that was just a typo." "Well, I'll adjust it to a standard room for 1 night. Eleanor will be very grateful for the savings." Williams left the room looking visibly smaller than when he had entered. Ethan, who had witnessed the entire exchange from a distance, felt a mix of admiration and something more primal he preferred not to analyze. On Thursday, they crossed paths in the elevator. "Welcome to corporate politics," Ethan commented as the doors closed, leaving them alone. "I saw you handle Williams yesterday." "I wasn't handling anyone," Sophie replied, though there was a playful sparkle in her eyes. "I was just giving a lesson on budget efficiency," with a smile that could freeze hell. "You noticed my smile?" she asked, turning to look straight at him. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. There was teasing in her tone, but also something more serious. Sophie wasn't shying away from personal conversations with him anymore. "I notice a lot of things about you, Sophie." "Careful, Ethan. That almost sounds like a genuine compliment." "Maybe it is." The elevator stopped on her floor. Sophie stepped out, but turned back before the doors closed. "Ethan?" "Yes?" "You've changed, too." "What do you mean?" "I haven't figured it out yet, but you have." The doors closed, leaving Ethan alone with a strange feeling in his stomach. Meanwhile, Victor was going through the stages of professional grief. Sophie tried to stay in touch. She'd stop by his desk sometimes, ask about cases, leave little notes about their inside jokes. but there was a distance now that hadn't been there before. "How are you adjusting to the new position?" he asked on a Friday when she stopped by to drop off some documents. "Good. Eleanor is an amazing mentor. I'm learning so much." "I'm glad for you," Victor said, and he really seemed to mean it. "You deserve every good opportunity that comes your way." "Victor," Sophie hesitated, "I hope you know our friendship hasn't changed." "It has, Sophie, and that's okay. You've grown. It's natural for things to change." Sophie felt a pang in her chest, but she knew he was right. Ethan, on the other hand, was realizing that chasing Sophie now was a completely different game. She was no longer impressed by his usual tactics. When he showed up with expensive coffee, she thanked him politely but mentioned she now had access to the executive floor's special coffee machine. When he tried to impress her with invitations to fancy events, she answered that Eleanor had already put her on the VIP list for the best networking events in the city. "It's hard competing with Eleanor Carter," Ethan muttered to himself after Sophie politely declined his invitation to a charity gala. By the second week, Ethan realized he needed a whole new strategy. Sophie was working late on a Thursday. He could see the light in her office from his... It was almost 10 at night when he decided to check on her. He knocked on the door and found Sophie surrounded by papers, holding a cup of cold coffee with tired lines under her eyes. "Sophie, are you okay?" She looked up, surprised. "Ethan, what are you doing here this late?" "Working. Like you. The real question is, why are you still here at this hour?" "Eleanor has an important meeting tomorrow morning with Japanese investors. I'm preparing the materials." Ethan looked at the stack of work on her desk. "Have you eaten today?" "I had lunch, I think." Sophie rubbed her eyes. "What time is it?" 10:15. "Wow, I didn't even notice." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. "Come with me." "Ethan, I have to finish." "Sophie, you won't do a good job if you're starving and exhausted." "Come on." 5 minutes. She gave him a doubtful look, but fatigue won over resistance. 5 minutes. Ethan led her to the executive floor's pantry and started searching through the fridges. Aha. He pulled out a paper bag. Eleanor's leftover lunch. Gourmet salad. Still good. "Ethan, I can't eat Eleanor's food." "Yes, you can. She always orders too much and leaves half. It's practically an unofficial policy." Sophie laughed, despite her exhaustion. "How do you know that?" "Because I work late sometimes too. And because I paid attention to her habits when I was trying to impress you." "When you were trying to impress me?" Ethan froze, realizing he had revealed more than he intended. Well, Ethan Brooks." Sophie stepped closer with a little smile he couldn't quite read. "Are you telling me you studied Eleanor just to impress me?" "Maybe. That's kind of pathetic. Thanks for the brutal honesty. But it's also kind of sweet." Ethan looked at her, trying to figure out if she was teasing him or being serious. "Sophie." "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you really here? And don't tell me it's about work." Ethan stayed silent for a long moment, looking at Sophie, her hair slightly messy, blouse wrinkled from the long day, but her eyes still sharp and alert. "Because you're different from anyone I've ever met, and because I can't stop thinking about you, and because, honestly, I don't even know if I'm still trying to win you over, or if I've already been won." Sophie blinked, clearly not expecting that much honesty. "Ethan, you don't have to say anything now. Just think about it, okay?" He walked to the door, then turned back. "And Sophie, eat that salad. Eleanor's going to need you at your best tomorrow." Sophie was left alone in the break room, holding the salad and trying to process what had just happened. Ethan Brooks had just shown himself vulnerable, and for the first time since she had met him, Sophie found that more attractive than all the arrogant confidence in the world, maybe Clara was right. Maybe the game really had changed. Sophie's graduation day came on a sunny Friday in May, and Carter and Lee decided it deserved a proper celebration. Eleanor had organized a small reception in the main conference room, complete with French champagne, elegant canapés, and a cake that cost more than Sophie's monthly rent. Half the firm was there, from partners to interns, all curious to see the official rise of the young woman who had saved the Nelson case and won Eleanor Carter's respect. Sophie arrived straight from the graduation ceremony, still in her black gown and carrying her diploma as if it were made of pure gold. Her parents had already gone home. They had to work on Saturday, but Sophie didn't mind. Her real professional family was there. Everyone. Eleanor tapped her champagne glass lightly. Drawing the room's attention, "I'd like to make a quick toast." The room fell into respectful silence. Sophie felt her face flush as every eye turned to her. Sophie Parker came to us 2 years ago as a dedicated assistant. Today, she graduates with a Doctor of Law degree from NYU. And I can say with confidence that this firm has gained not only an attorney, but a future leader. Polite applause spread through the room. Sophie smiled, trying not to look as moved as she felt. Sophie has shown not only exceptional technical skills, but also the wisdom and judgment that separate good lawyers from great ones. And I'm pleased to announce that, starting Monday, she will officially be promoted to junior associate, working on high-profile cases alongside our senior team. This time, the applause was more enthusiastic. Clara shouted, "Go, Sophie!" from the back, earning laughter all around. Sophie laughed too, feeling for a moment like the star of a movie where everything works out in the end. Ethan watched from a corner of the room, trying to keep a neutral, professional expression but failing miserably. There was pride in his eyes, and something else Sophie couldn't quite define. When their eyes met, he raised his glass in a silent salute. Victor was there too, but he kept a respectful distance. He clapped sincerely when Eleanor finished her speech. Though Sophie caught the trace of sadness in his expression, she made a mental note to speak with him later. She didn't want her professional rise to cost her a friendship she valued. And now, Eleanor concluded, let's celebrate properly. Sophie, congratulations. You deserve every bit of recognition you're receiving. The rest of the afternoon went by in a blur of congratulations, handshakes, and conversations about future cases. Sophie found herself being introduced to important clients, discussing legal strategies as an equal, and being consulted on matters that, just that same morning, would have been far above her role. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Around 6:00 the evening, as the reception was winding down and people began to leave, Ethan walked up to her. "Dr. Parker," he said with a wry smile, "may I steal a few minutes from your busy schedule?" "Dr. Brooks," she answered in the same tone. "I think I can fit you in between my important appointments." "How generous. So, how do you plan on celebrating your first night as an officially minted lawyer?" Sophie thought for a moment. "I'll probably just go home, order a pizza, and watch some awful movie on Netflix. Nothing glamorous." "Interesting." Ethan tilted his head. "May I suggest an alternative?" "Depends. Does it involve fancy restaurants and networking talk?" "On the contrary, it involves cheap pizza and objectively terrible movies." "I thought we could celebrate the old-fashioned way." Sophie looked at him in surprise. Ethan Brooks, suggesting cheap pizza. "Are you feeling all right? Maybe I'm trying something new." "So, what do you say? Want to celebrate your JD in the most anticlimactic way possible?" Sophie laughed. There was something about Ethan's suggestion that was at once unexpected and perfectly fitting for her mood. "You know what? I'm in, but I get to choose the movie." "Deal. But if you pick some sappy romantic comedy, I'll have to reconsider our professional partnership." "Ethan, you clearly don't know me well enough. I only watch 80 seconds action movies with questionable budgets, and even worse, special effects. Now I'm genuinely intrigued." 2 hours later, they were at Ethan's apartment, which was exactly what Sophie had expected. Minimalist, expensive, and with a view that probably cost more than the GDP of some small countries. Ethan had kept his promise. Pizza from a local place Sophie never imagined he even knew about, soda from a vending machine, and a movie called Explosive Command 3, The Revenge, that looked like it had been made with a $500 budget and a lot of courage. "This is artistically questionable," Ethan remarked, watching a scene where the main character apparently defeated 10 ninjas using only a rubber hammer. "It's a masterpiece," Sophie defended, stealing a slice of pizza. "Look at this completely impossible physics. The guy just jumped off a building, rolled down a steep hill, and got up without a scratch. And now he's driving a motorcycle into a helicopter." "Exactly. Pure art." Ethan laughed, and Sophie realized she had never seen him truly relaxed like this. No flawless suit, no professional posture, no need to impress anyone. He was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, his hair slightly messy, and he looked normal, human. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said during an especially long commercial break. "Of course. Why did you suggest this? Pizza and a bad movie don't really seem like your style." Ethan hesitated, fiddling with the soda bottle label. "Do you remember our first meeting? I mean, our first misunderstanding, when you got into my car thinking it was an Uber and I almost scared you to death?" "Exactly. That day, you told me we came from different worlds. You, food truck. Me, fancy restaurants. And you were right. Sophie studied him carefully. And, Ethan continued, I realized I like your world better than mine. There was something in his voice that made Sophie stop pretending to pay attention to the movie. Ethan, Sophie, can I be honest with you? Always. When I first met you, you were a challenge, something I wanted to win over because I couldn't have it easily. But at some point, I don't even know exactly when, you stopped being a challenge and became you. Sophie felt her heart race. What do you mean? I mean, I don't want to win you over anymore. I want to know you. I want to know what terrible movies you like, what kind of pizza you prefer, how you look when you really laugh. They were sitting on the couch, close enough for Sophie to feel the warmth radiating from him. Ethan turned to look directly at her. Sophie? He leaned in slightly, and Sophie realized he was about to kiss her. Her heart pounded, but she didn't pull away. On the contrary, she leaned toward him. Then, at the last second, Ethan stopped. I shouldn't, he murmured, pulling back slightly. Why not? Sophie asked, surprising herself with her own boldness. Because when I kiss you, and just now he had said when. Not if I want it to be because you want it. Not because it's a special night or because we're caught up in the moment. Sophie looked into his eyes and saw something she had never seen in Ethan Brooks before. Real vulnerability. Ethan, Sophie, you've changed everything for me. I don't know yet exactly what that means. But I know I want to find out with you. If you want to. They stayed quiet for a moment, the awful movie playing in the background, creating a completely unsuitable soundtrack for a moment that felt far too important for words. I think I should go, Sophie said at last, but without any urgency. I think so too, Ethan agreed, but didn't move. They looked at each other for a few more seconds, and Sophie had the strange feeling that something had been decided without either of them saying exactly what. At the door, Ethan helped her with her coat. Sophie? Yes? Congratulations. Truly. You're going to be an incredible lawyer. Thank you. And Ethan? Yes? Thank you for the most normal night I've had in months. She walked away, but not before lightly touching his arm. Ethan stood at the door, watching her step into the elevator. When the doors closed, he leaned his forehead against the wall and smiled. The game had definitely changed. Now, the question was no longer who would win over whom. It was who would have the courage to confess first. Ethan spent 3 days planning the perfect dinner. A table set with porcelain dishes his mother had insisted he buy and that he never used, imported candles that cost more than a junior associate's monthly salary, French wine from a vintage the seller swore was transcendental, a carefully chosen playlist with soft jazz that wasn't too romantic or too obvious. He had rehearsed the invitation 3 times in the mirror before going to find Sophie on Monday. Sophie, would you like to have dinner with me on Thursday? He had asked, trying to sound casual while leaning against her office doorframe. Dinner as in talking about cases, or dinner as in actual dinner, she asked, looking at him over her reading glasses. Dinner, as in, I want to spend time with you without talking about work even once. Sophie smiled. All right, but nothing too fancy, okay? I don't want to feel like I'm at a job interview. I promise it'll be relaxed. Ethan lied shamelessly. On Thursday at 7, Ethan was checking the table for the 10th time when the doorbell rang. He took a deep breath, smoothed his shirt, and opened the door, ready to impress Sophie with his sophistication. Sophie was standing in the hallway, holding a Tony's pizza box and a bottle of orange juice. Hi, she said with a mischievous smile. I brought something for dinner. Ethan blinked, trying to process the scene. Sophie, you brought pizza, Tony's pizza, the best in Manhattan, and juice, because I know you probably bought wine too expensive for me to even pronounce. Ethan looked at the pizza, then the juice, then at Sophie, and started laughing. You did this on purpose? Maybe. She walked past him into the apartment. Wow, Ethan, this place looks like a decorating magazine. How many candles did you light? Just a few. There are at least 20 candles. Ethan, you're going to set the building on fire. I just wanted it to feel romantic. Sophie laughed and stopped when she saw the table set with all the pomp and circumstance. Ethan, this is beautiful, but you know I'm going to feel terrible eating pizza out of a box at this table, right? Ethan looked at his perfect table, then at Sophie with her squashed pizza box and grocery store juice, and made a decision. You know what? You're right. He picked up the porcelain plates, the crystal glasses, and started putting everything away. What are you doing? Improvising. 5 minutes later, they were sitting on the living room floor, eating pizza straight from the box, drinking juice from regular glasses, surrounded by cushions Ethan had pulled off the sofa. This is so much better, Sophie said, grabbing a slice of pizza. Much more. Us? We have a style? Apparently, we do. Chaotic, but comfortable. Ethan laughed, realizing she was right. There was something about this improvised version of dinner that felt more real than all the elegance he had planned. Sophie, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you bring pizza? Really? Sophie chewed thoughtfully before answering. Because I wanted to see what you'd do. If you'd get annoyed, or if you'd try to pretend everything was fine, or if I'd throw the whole plan out and eat pizza on the floor with you. Exactly. And which answer were you hoping for? Honestly, Sophie smiled. This one, they talked for hours. Ethan told her about growing up with impossible expectations. About never knowing if people liked him or just his last name. Sophie shared how she had worked since she was 16 and about her dream of making a difference in the world through law. Remember when you got into my car? Sophie laughed, grabbing another slice. How could I forget? You drove like you were running from the FBI. I was terrified. A stranger got into my car and started giving me orders. Just drive isn't giving orders. It's efficient direction. Ethan Brooks, you literally hijacked my car. Technically, you hijacked me. I just got in. You drove me away. They laughed, and Sophie realized how easy it was to be with Ethan when he let his guard down. Without the professional arrogance, without the need to impress. He was surprisingly endearing. And the war between you and Victor? Sophie asked. You two were kind of ridiculous. Ethan winced. Kind of ridiculous, Sophie? I literally sabotaged a printer just to have an excuse to help you. You did what? Forget I said that. Ethan Brooks. Sophie threw a cushion at him. You sabotaged company equipment. It was a very small sabotage. And technical, and reversible. You're terrible, but charming. Terrible and charming are not mutually exclusive. The conversation flowed easily from one topic to another. They discovered they both hated horror movies, loved true crime documentaries, and had very strong opinions about the superiority of New York pizza. Around 10, the room was glowing softly from the remaining candles. Sophie was leaning back against a cushion, Ethan lying on his side, watching her. Both of them laughing at a story she was telling about a client who wanted to sue a company because the newspaper horoscope was too vague. He said Libras should get more specific predictions because they're naturally more indecisive. Sophie mimicked the client's voice. And that this was astrological discrimination. Astrological discrimination. Ethan repeated. That's not even a real thing. I know. But he was convinced he had a solid case. They laughed until Sophie noticed Ethan had stopped laughing and was just looking at her. What is it? She asked. Nothing. It's just that you're amazing, Sophie. Ethan leaned in slightly. Sophie, His phone rang, loud, insistent, with the ringtone he used only for office emergencies. No, Ethan muttered, not moving away. The phone kept ringing. Ethan, answer it. It can wait. No, it can't. You know it can't. Ethan closed his eyes, clearly frustrated, but grabbed the phone. Ethan Brooks, he answered, sounding irritated. Sophie sat back, fixing her hair, trying not to show her own frustration. The moment had been perfect. Finally, after weeks of growing tension, they had been about to— How much? Ethan was saying into the phone, now standing, running a hand through his hair. No, it can't wait until tomorrow. I'm on my way. He hung up and looked at Sophie with the expression of someone who just lost the lottery. Sophie, I have to go. The Piton case blew up literally problems with the investigators. Missing documents. Eleanor is there handling it and needs all the partners. Go, Sophie said, standing and smoothing her clothes. It's important. It's not more important than this. Ethan gestured between them. Ethan, go. Work is work. Sophie, really, go. Before Eleanor kills you. Ethan grabbed his jacket, clearly torn between his professional duty and the desire to stay. I'll be back as soon as I can, and we can pick up where we left off. Of course, Sophie smiled. But there was something forced in it. Ethan hesitated at the door. Sophie, it was wonderful, Ethan. Now go. After Ethan left, Sophie was alone in his apartment, surrounded by half-melted candles and leftover pizza. She picked up a napkin and wrote a quick note. Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. Ethan came back at 2:00 the morning, exhausted but eager to find Sophie. The apartment was empty. Tidy. The candles blown out. On the kitchen table, he found the note. Ethan, it was a wonderful dinner. Even with pizza, especially with pizza. Thank you for a perfect night. Almost. He slipped the note into his wallet, smiling in spite of his frustration. The next morning at the office, Sophie greeted Ethan normally, professionally, but there was something new in her eyes. A silent promise that the conversation wasn't over. Ethan knew he couldn't delay any longer. Next time, there would be no phones, no emergencies, no interruptions. It was time to stop almost kissing Sophie Parker and finally do what he should have done weeks ago. Eleanor Carter had a special talent for timing. On the Monday after Ethan and Sophie's almost dinner, she called them both into her office with an expression that revealed nothing. "I have a case for you too," she announced, sliding a thick file across the desk. Tengra Industries versus Global Dynamics Solutions. A merge dispute gone sour. 3 weeks to settle, or it goes to court. Ethan and Sophie exchanged quick glances. "Together?" Sophie asked. "Together," Eleanor confirmed. Ethan has the experience in corporate mergers. Sophie has the eye for detail that can make the difference. "I believe you make an interesting pair." There was something in Eleanor's tone that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. "Eleanor," Ethan cleared his throat. "Are you sure this is a good idea? Sophie and I have different working dynamics. Exactly why I want you together. Différentes dynamics create creative solutions. Unless there's some personal issue I should know about." Sophie and Ethan answered at the same time. "No, of course not. No problem. Why would there be?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Great. Then there won't be any objections. Conference room 7 is reserved for you. Progress report on Friday." For the next 3 days, Conference room 7 became neutral territory in the undeclared war between Ethan and Sophie. They worked well together, surprisingly well. Ethan brought strategic experience and knowledge of the legal complexities of mergers. Sophie contributed meticulous analysis and an impressive ability to spot inconsistencies other lawyers missed. But the tension was always there, lurking beneath the surface. "Ethan, did you read Clause 15? Sophie asked on Tuesday, pointing to a document. "I did. Standard boilerplate language. Read it again. Specifically, the part about transferring intellectual property." Ethan reread it, frowning. "Wow, they're trying to hold on to rights over patents that technically don't belong to them." "Exactly. It's subtle, but it's basically legal theft disguised as corporate language." "Sophie Parker." Ethan looked at her with genuine admiration. "You're dangerously good at this." "I'm just doing my job." "No, you're being brilliant. There's a difference." Sophie felt her cheeks warm and quickly turned her attention back to the documents. The teasing continued, but now it had a different tone, less competitive, more flirtatious. "Ethan, could you hand me that file?" Sophie asked on Wednesday. "Which one? The blue one, or the one you're avoiding because you're afraid of getting too close to me?" "The blue one, Ethan. Always the blue one." "Too bad. The other one was more interesting." "You're impossible." "I'm charming." "There's a difference." "Yes, there is. You're not charming." Ethan laughed, and Sophie had to bite her lip to keep from smiling. On Thursday, they were reviewing the final strategy when Sophie stood to get some water and tripped over a stack of documents. Ethan caught her by the arm before she could fall. For a moment, they were very close. Sophie could smell his cologne, see the small lines near his eyes that showed up when he smiled. "Careful," Ethan murmured, not letting go of her arm right away. "Thanks," Sophie answered, not stepping back either. They stayed like that for a few seconds, looking at each other, until Sophie cleared her throat and stepped away. "Documents," she said unnecessarily. "Documents," Ethan agreed. On Friday, they presented their strategy to Eleanor. 4 minutes of solid arguments, well-researched precedents, and a settlement proposal that protected both sides' interests while exposing the problematic clauses. "Impressive," Eleanor said when they finished. "You two work very well together. The case is practically won." Ethan and Sophie exchanged proud smiles. "You can use the rest of the afternoon to finalize the details. Good work." Alone in the conference room, they began organizing the papers. The case was nearly wrapped up. The deadline pressure had eased, and for the first time all week, they could relax. "We're good at this," Sophie said, stacking papers. "We're a good team," Ethan agreed. "Professional and something else." Sophie stopped sorting documents. "Ethan." "Sophie, I need to tell you something." She turned fully to look at him. "What?" Ethan took a deep breath, like someone about to jump out of a plane. "When I first met you, you were a challenge. Someone I wanted to win over because, well, because I always got what I wanted. And you were different?" Sophie didn't say anything, just listened. "But at some point," Ethan went on, running a hand through his hair, It stopped being about winning you over and became about you, about the way you laugh when you think no one's watching, about how focused you get when you're solving a complex problem, about how you never back down from a fight, but you're never cruel. He stopped, looking straight into her eyes. Sophie, I fell in love with you, with the smart, strong, funny, completely impossible woman you are, and I've never met anyone like you. Sophie stayed quiet for a long moment. Ethan started to get nervous. Sophie, can you say something? Anything? She smiled. A calm, knowing smile. Ethan Brooks, I already knew. What? I already knew you were in love with me. And you know what? I was just waiting for you to stop stalling and finally say it. Ethan blinked. You knew? Ethan, you sabotaged office equipment to impress me, planned elaborate dinners, brought gourmet coffee every day for a week, and you thought you were being subtle? I thought I was being charming. You were being obvious, adorably obvious. And you? Ethan moved closer. What do you feel? Sophie stepped closer, too. I think you'll have to find out. Ethan didn't need more encouragement. He leaned in and kissed her. Really? Kissed her this time. No hesitation, no interruptions, no games. Sophie responded immediately, as if she'd been waiting for that moment for weeks. The kiss was everything Ethan had imagined and more sweet, but with an intensity that made his heart race. When they pulled back, they were both smiling. So, Ethan murmured, still holding her face, does this mean you're in love with me too? It means you finally figured it out. Sophie Parker, you're impossible. Ethan Brooks, so are you. They laughed and kissed again. On the other side of the glass wall of the conference room, Victor walked by, carrying some files. He saw Sophie and Ethan kissing and stopped for a moment. He felt a tightness in his chest, he couldn't deny that. But looking at them, seeing the genuine happiness on Sophie's face, Victor smiled quietly. Sophie deserved to be happy. And if Ethan Brooks could give her that, then Victor could accept it. He kept walking down the hallway, leaving the two of them alone. Ethan, Sophie said when they stopped kissing for the third time. Yes? I still can't believe it took you so long to get the courage to say something. Hey, declarations are complicated territory. I wanted to be sure I wouldn't mess everything up. Mess it up? How? Like, I don't know. What if you had said you only saw me as a colleague or thought I was just some arrogant fool? Sophie laughed. Ethan, you are an arrogant fool. But now, you're my arrogant fool. Technically, I think that means we're dating now. Technically, I think so. Good. Ethan pulled her closer. Because I have plans for us. What kind of plans? The kind that involve pizza, terrible movies, and lots of time to make up for all the moments. I almost kissed you, but didn't. Sophie smiled. Ethan Brooks, you're finally speaking my language. 6 months later, Ethan called Sophie into an urgent meeting on a Friday at 6. 0 inches the evening. Ethan, what kind of urgent meeting happens at 6 on a Friday? Sophie protested when he showed up at her office. I have plans with Clara tonight. It's about the Nelson case. Important développement. Main conference room. 5 minutes. Sophie sighed, saved the document she was working on, and followed him down the hall. This better be truly important, she muttered. Clara will kill me if I cancel our happy hour again. Ethan opened the door to the main conference room and motioned for her to go in first. After you, Counselor Parker. Sophie walked in and stopped immediately. The room was transformed. Rose petals covered the floor, small candles gave off a warm glow, and the walls were decorated with photos, pictures of the two of them from the very beginning. There was a picture of Sophie's silver Honda parked outside the cafe, taken the day after the incident. A photo of them arguing passionately during the Tengra case, both gesturing dramatically. A photo of Sophie's office the day of her promotion. Even a terrible, blurry photo Clara had secretly taken of them kissing in the break room. Ethan, Sophie whispered, covering her mouth with her hands. What is this? This? Ethan stood in the middle of the room. Is our story. He pointed to the first picture. It started with you thinking I was a criminal. Then, to another, continued with you proving me completely wrong about everything. And finally, the last one. It led here, where I realized the most amazing woman I've ever met was right in front of me the whole time. Ethan got down on one knee in the middle of the rose petals, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Sophie started laughing and crying at the same time. Ethan Brooks, you are completely crazy. About you, he finished. Sophie Parker, you are the best mistake I ever made. Will you marry me? Sophie looked at the ring, simple, elegant, perfect, then at Ethan, kneeling in what was supposed to be a corporate meeting room, but which he had turned into something magical. Yes, she said, laughing through her tears. Yes, of course, yes. Ethan stood up and kissed her, lifting her off the floor as rose petals flew around them. Wait. Sophie pulled back for a second. There's no urgent Nelson case, is there? There is. The case of Ethan Brooks versus the chance of losing the love of his life because of a lack of courage. You're impossible. I'm engaged. Big difference. 3 months later, they were married in an elegant garden on Long Island, surrounded by colleagues from the firm, Sophie's friends from college, and even a few clients who had become close over the years. Eleanor Carter, dressed in a flawless pink suit, officiated the ceremony. Apparently, she was licensed to perform weddings. One of my many hidden talents, she had explained. We are here today, Eleanor began, to celebrate a union that proves sometimes the best relationships start with the worst misunderstandings. The crowd laughed, especially Clara, who had heard the story of the carjacking about 50 times. Victor sat in the third row, wearing his best suit and holding a suspiciously small package. Over the months, he had become one of the strongest supporters of Ethan and Sophie's relationship, often telling anyone who would listen how he had seen their chemistry from day one. Ethan, Eleanor continued, you may recite your vows. Ethan took a deep breath, looking at Sophie in her simple but stunning dress. Sophie, when I first met you, you were running away from me at 60 miles per hour. Ironically, that's when I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life trying to catch up with you. I promised to love your intelligence, your humor, your ability to put me in my place when I need it, and most of all, your extraordinary gift of turning the worst days into something funny. Sophie was crying again. I also promised never to get into the wrong car again, Ethan added, making everyone laugh. And I promise that no matter where life takes us, I'll always want you in the driver's seat. Sophie. Eleanor turned to the bride. Your vows? Sophie wiped her tears and smiled. Ethan, you came into my life in the most literal way possible by getting into my car without warning. And since then, you've entered every part of my life the same way, unannounced, a little clumsy, but always making everything better and more interesting. Ethan laughed. I promise to laugh at your bad jokes, eat pizza on the floor when you want to be strangely romantic, and always remind you that you can be a brilliant lawyer and still a total mess at the same time. I love you exactly as you are, too confident, too charming, and way too mine. Eleanor declared them husband and wife, and they kissed to enthusiastic applause. During the reception, Victor came over with his gift. For both of you, he said, handing them a small box. Sophie opened it and found an Uber keychain with the words, "It all started with a mistake engraved on the back. Victor." Sophie laughed, hugging him. This is perfect. It seemed fitting. He smiled. After all, if Ethan hadn't gotten into the wrong car, you two would never have met. Actually, Ethan corrected, if Sophie hadn't stopped at the wrong light. Ethan Brooks, Sophie interrupted. Don't start that argument at our wedding. Yes, Mrs. Ryan. Brooks. Wow. That sounds strange. You'll get used to it. Later, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Sophie whispered in Ethan's ear, You know you'll never need Uber again, right? Ethan smiled, spinning her gently. Why is that? Because now I only want to travel with you anywhere. Ethan pulled her closer. Sophie Brooks, you are still the most certain thing that's ever happened to me. Even if it all started as a mistake, especially because it started as a mistake, they danced under the stars, surrounded by friends and family, celebrating a love story that had begun with shouting and grown into something they both knew would last forever.